What's up, guys? Welcome back to Cubase from scratch. This is Jeff. I'm back with the next episode of this how to build an EDM track from scratch. And before we get too much further, I want to talk about track organization and structure. And one of the things I really like to do with my tracks is colorize them. And you can see just as you start building your stuff out here, you kind of get the default setup, which is, you have a folder of inputs, outputs, you have a folder for VST instruments, and then when you add a new rack instrument and it says, hey, you want to add a MIDI track for that, you say yes, and it puts it out here, and then you duplicate that. So now you have kind of a disorganization here. So the very first thing I like to do is or start colorizing my track. So because I usually start with drums, I'm going to just use the first color here, and I'm going to put all my drums being red. And since these tracks are sending drum information as well, I'm going to color these red. And then I'm going to, this is just a personal preference here, but I'm going to put these MIDI parts that are sending to the Groove Agent inside the Groove Agent folder. Okay, and I'm going to hit save. And then the next thing I'm going to do is these are not named how I want them to be named either. So you can see these parts actually show up on the mixer, and so you kind of have a little bit of disorganization on the mixer as well. So I usually like to have my master all the way over the stereo out on the right hand side, and this master is actually referring to this master, which is the master output of the Groove Agent plugin. So it's really not master at all. This is drums, let's say. And so you can see now we've got drums here. So this part here, going vertically down the list of all your tracks, is the same thing as going horizontally in your mixing console. Now I almost never need anything from MIDI parts on the mixer. The sound coming out is coming out from the sound part. You can see the differences. This is a MIDI track, this is a sound track. And so that audio part comes out on the drums, and I don't really even need to see the MIDI parts on the mixer at all. So I like to keep my mixer clean. Now we have just drums, and that makes sense. You have stereo in, so that's your mic coming into the computer, any mics that you have, and then the drums is your VST audio for this one drum track, and then the stereo output. So over time you can really get a mess going if you don't stay up with it while you're working. It's just way easier to do while you're working and just stay organized. Now the other thing I like to do is I like to put my MIDI parts above my sound part. So this is how I like to organize, and I recommend you do the same. Now the other thing is they're not really named that well either. So let's go ahead and double click here and call this the kick. That's the kick part. This is going to be the snare part, and this little part here, I'm not entirely sure what this actually does. It's, I guess, a master fader for the volume of the VST plugin itself. I just leave it at 0 and almost never touch that. We're going to be mixing audio in the fader channel down here later when we do automation, but you can just leave the output of the Groove Agent at 0 and pretty much forget about that. So if you want, you can put this right at the very top. So now also these parts are named originally by the default for the VST synth that created it. So I'm gonna hit save again, and you can see here what I want to do is I want to name these parts. Now this actually brings up another topic, which is there's a difference between a copy of a pattern and an instance of a pattern. So you can see if I come into this part, and let's say I play a different kick drum, let's say. So I'm moving this up and down with the arrow keys, and now you can see if I edit this part, that's the original part because it was a copy, and this is an instant part, the original part. So there's two distinct separate copies, and that's really the important part, is they're completely separate. Now if I want to edit these all together, or if I want to create what's called an instance, if you, instead of holding Option when you drag it, hold Option and Shift, and what happens is now you have an instance of the same part. And the reason that's helpful is, let's say for example I want to actually make sure that the volume of all these kick drums is the maximum volume. So you do that under the velocity, and you can see this little, what do they call it? A lane. In this lane down here, you can close this lane, remove controller lane, but essentially you have the notes in the piano roll, and then you have lanes for the different controller data for MIDI parts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all these parts, and I'm going to come over here to this handle and drag all the velocity to the max. And now that I did that, you can see the benefit of having an instance part is this now has all the same maximum velocity as well, because it's an instance of the same part. And I also want to rename it, so this is going to be the kick part, main kick 1, and this is going to be the snare part. Say snare 1. All right, so now we have some decent organization here. We have drums as a main output from our channel. You can see everything in the mixer looks good, and in the project track view, and we can open and close the Groove Agent plugin. And if you notice, you can't change the name of this folder, I don't think. Yeah, you can do it here. You can't do it here for some reason. You can do it here. So if you just want, if you don't care what this says, you don't care to name it Groove Agent SE. That's not necessary to leave that. So I usually just name it what it is, drums. And then this is the separate drum part here. This one you can leave it as Groove Agent. That's a good thing to leave, just because if you have multiple different Groove Agent parts, or you have a machine, you bring that in, or battery, it's helpful to leave at least one part. And this is a good one to do, just because you almost never touch that one. It's just really for volume of the MIDI data and read and write automation. So this is looking pretty good. I think in the next one we'll build some more tracks and do some more editing. I think we'll separate out these parts here onto separate outputs from the VST, so that we can mix them.